At around about this time of the year, every Vietnamese household will be getting pretty busy. And that's because in a week's time, TET, or the Vietnamese Lunar New Year, will be upon us. Food is the very soul of Vietnamese culture, and for thousands of years it's been able to bring people together no matter how far apart they've been. Hey everybody, I'm Albert, and in this video I want to show you how to make some of the most delicious, hearty, and humble dishes that I grew up eating every year during TET, because who wouldn't froth a juicy piece of TET Khao to kick off the new year. I've siphoned these recipes from Mum, who is the head chef of the Lee household, and I'm going to try, operative word try, to not let her down because she'll probably disown me if I give her a bad name. So here goes. Without further ado, these are the tastes of TET. If you've grown up in a Vietnamese household, TET is a celebration that often goes for 4 days. New Year's Eve, the first, the second, and the third day. But actually preparations begin a week before. The story goes that there is a kitchen god, Bao, and he needs to report back to the Jade Emperor at the end of the lunar year about all the families. So he starts his journey 7 days before the end of the month. And before he goes on his wayward journey, we usher him off with some tea and snacks. You can grab any snacks. I have here some traditional peanut and sesame snacks, but you can use any from your Asian groceries. All you need to do is place them nicely on a plate. Next up, it's time to brew some jasmine tea. Place the tea and the snacks on your nearest cooktop and light some incense for Bao. Don't forget to pour your man some tea and say a few words of prayer. Now once the formalities are out of the way, it's time to taste some of the snacks. Alright, on to the real show now. First up, TET congee, or braised pork belly with eggs. And to kick off, we start by making the caramel colouring. In a small pot on low to medium heat, stir in 1/4 cup of raw sugar along with 1 tablespoon of water. Now let that simmer until the sugar starts to melt and caramelise. We're looking for a very deep dark brown colour that's very viscous in texture, and very rich looking. Now keep a constant look on it because it's going to be bubbling a lot and it can burn quite quickly. Once it's at this colour, take it off the heat and add another tablespoon of water whilst stirring. Pour it into a small cup and let it cool down. It should be a very thick liquid, like the colour of Coca-Cola. Next, we need to boil some eggs. Put some water in the boil and get a small pin-like tool to poke an ever so small hole at the bottom of the egg. Doing this will ensure that the eggs don't stick to the shell when you start peeling them. Now once the temperature of the boiling water hits about 100 degrees or rolling boil, using a wooden spoon, carefully place the eggs into boiling water for about 7 to 8 minutes. Remember to constantly stir for about the first minute or so. This will ensure that the yolk is centered. After they're done, take them out and immediately plunge them in an ice bath. This will ensure that the eggs don't keep cooking after you take them out and wait for them to cool down before peeling. Next up, we're crushing 6 cloves of garlic. You'll notice that I've crushed the garlic before peeling them, and that makes it so much easier to take the skin off. Now set aside about 4 dried chilies and a few modest sprinkles of black peppercorns. Now that that's all out of the way, it's time to direct our attention to this salacious, ever so seductive piece of 1 kilogram pork belly, which we'll use an old razor to shave any excess hair off the skin for a much more smoother melt in your mouth experience. Now what we're trying to do here is to cut the pork belly into obnoxiously large pieces that are just way too big to fit all in your mouth. But worry not, there is a method to this madness. It's so that when we start braising, the pork belly will continue to reduce down into a much more mouth-friendly form factor. Now once we've passed that milestone, it's about time to bring everything together. Pour 1 litre of water into a pot and add in 2 cans of coconut juice by puncturing 2 holes on the top of both cans on either side. Once all our liquids are in the pot, it's time to turn on the stove and bring them to the boil. Now it's super important to bring the pot to a boil before adding in the pork belly. This is to ensure that once everything is cooked, the broth is super clear. Now that we've added the pork belly into the pot, it's now time to add in the garlic, the dry chilies, and the black peppercorns. Also add in 1 teaspoon of the dark caramel mixture from before. To flavour this, add 1/3 cup with an extra teaspoon of fish sauce, followed by 1/2 teaspoon of MSG for the umami bombs. Now we don't need to add any sugar because the coconut juice is sweet enough. Now once all that's in, close the lid and let it simmer on low heat for about 90 minutes. After which we'll add back in our boiled eggs and let that simmer for another 10 minutes, remembering to turn it over every few minutes so that the eggs can get some nice colour before taking it off the heat. And boom! That's TET everybody. Kanua yom, or stuffed bitter melon soup. Let's begin by making the stuffing for the bitter melon. Start by rehydrating the black fungus by adding some warm water, just enough to cover 15 grams of dry black fungus. Once rehydrated, roughly dice and set aside. Now grab 20 grams of your dried shrimp that has been rehydrated in hot water and pound it in a mortar and pestle until the texture becomes flaky and fluffy. Set this aside as well. Next up, grab the glass noodles that have been rehydrated in warm water for over half an hour and cut them into 2 finger length pieces. Now pop that onto the plate along with the fungus and the dried prawns. And now we move over to the mince. Grab 1 kilogram of butcher minced pork belly and place it into a bowl. Now grab that pretty looking plate from earlier and slide the contents into the bowl. After this, grab a microplane grater and grate 3 cloves of peeled garlic into the bowl. Follow this up by also grating in 1 whole bulb of a shallot and then chop finely the bits that can't be grated in. Grind in some black pepper, followed by the Vietnamese trifecta of seasoning, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of MSG, and 1 tablespoon of sugar. Now don't stop there, follow up immediately with 1 teaspoon of soy sauce, 1/2 teaspoon of fish sauce, and about a handful of some finely chopped spring onions. Now go on and combine the stuffing together in a bowl and really get your hands and extremities in there. Now to the star of the dish, the bitter melon. Carefully lop off a tiny bit of either side, cut it in half, and then in half again? Yeah, sure, why not? You want large chunks that are about 6 centimeters in length. Then using the back of a spoon, scoop out the insides of the bitter melon. Realize it's gonna take ages, so call in mum for some heavy firepower. Once cleaned, it's time to stuff the bitter melon. Using one hand, clasp the bitter melon chunks so that your fingers close off one end. This is to ensure that the stuffing doesn't fall out the other side when you start pushing it in. Using a spoon, start scooping in some of that good old stuffing and press it down firmly so that there are no large air pockets left inside the cavity. Once you've stuffed all of the bitter melon, set them aside for now because we're about to move on to the glue of this dish, the broth. Yeah, so I kind of forgot to mention this to you earlier. I know, I'm sorry, that's strike one. But you'll need some chicken stock to make the broth. You can use the pre-made store-bought stock, or you can be an OG and make your own very easily by buying some chicken frames or bones from your local butcher or poultry connoisseur. Add 1.5 liters of stock into a new pot and season with some cracked black pepper and the Vietnamese golden triangle of seasoning, which is 1 tablespoon of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of MSG, and 1 tablespoon of sugar. Now to this, we also add another umami agent, 3 tablespoons of fish sauce. Now all that's left is to let the broth come to the boil, and then forget that it was boiling and then panic and then quickly lower in the stuffed bitter melon. Let it simmer for 40 minutes on low to medium heat, and finally garnish with some chopped spring onions. Jiachua sour bean sprouts. This next one's pretty easy. First off, get some Chinese chives or hare and cut them up in 5cm chunks. Then using a grater or a slicer, the congee and carrots, grate 1 carrot. Now it's time to boil some water in the kettle and blanch the bean sprout for about 2 minutes before draining the water and adding it back in the Chinese chives and carrots whilst mixing together. From here on, we make our pickling solution. Add 1 cup of white vinegar and 1/3 cup of sugar to 1/2 cup of cold water. Then sprinkle in a 1/2 teaspoon of salt and give it a whisk to combine, and then pour the pickling solution that you've just made into the bean sprouts, the carrots, and the Chinese chives. Now that the pickling solution is in the bowl, lightly press down the veggies so that the pickling solution can really get to work. Leave it for about 2 hours in the fridge or until ready to serve. Gỏi chua is a staple in most Vietnamese feasts. It's like the palate cleanser from the rich meats and the hearty soups. Okay, to start off, we're gonna peel and then finally julienne or grate 3 large carrots and 1 white radish. We'll then take 1 whole onion and run it through a mandolin if you're lazy like me, or hand slice it if you want to be an OG. Now add all of this into a mixing bowl and shuffle up all the contents so that the onions, the carrots and the radish are now intertwined. Next up, it's time for the pickling solution. Once again, take 1/2 cup white vinegar and combine it in a mixing vessel with 1/2 cup cold water and 1/2 cup of sugar, along with 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Mix it well together before pouring it into the carrot and radish and onion mixture. Like before, press down gently so that the pickling solution can really get to work. Now set this aside for 2 hours. Now onto the bit where hopefully no one gets weirded out on. Yep, I'm talking about boiling the pig ears, which you can get at your local Asian butcher. Pig ear is more about texture than it is about flavour. It provides you that extra crunch. In a saucepan of boiling water, dunk in the pig ears and boil for 10 minutes before setting aside to cool down. Whilst that's cooling, we'll get started on the seafood. First off, by starting with the calamari that we got fresh from Footscray Market. What we'll do now is make a cross hatch on the surface of the calamari with a knife, so that when it cooks, the incisions puff out, helping it cook faster and spring like some kind of weird white flour thing. Into a pot of boiling water, add the calamari and about 6 or so large fresh tiger prawns that are unpeeled at the same time. Watch the colour of the prawns. What we're looking for is an orange colour that doesn't look translucent. As for the calamari, we're also looking for a pearl white colour that's also not translucent. Immediately shock the prawns and calamari in an ice bath once they are cooked. Next, we peel the prawns and devein them, followed by cutting them in half. For the calamari, cut them into thin strips about 0.2 cm thickness. Slightly tilt the knife towards you and cut it at an angle to increase the surface area of the strip. Now remember those pig ears? It's time we cut them too in the same style, angling the knife towards us and making thin angled slices. Once done, set all the pig ears and seafood aside, because now it's time to check back on our pickled vegetables. Grab handfuls at a time and rinse out any excess pickling solution. Like really put your hands into it and really squeeze out those pickle juices. It's now time to add some herbs into our gai. We're using Vietnamese mint here, or rau ram. To make sure we're using the right bits of the Vietnamese mint, take a stalk and pick only the leaves, then roughly chop them. Now we don't want them too thin. Now that we've prepared all the ingredients for the gai, we need to bring them all together using the dressing. To get started, break 3 fresh chilies into a mortar and pestle. Add to this 4 cloves of crushed garlic, 1 tablespoon of sugar, and ½ teaspoon of MSG. Ground this mixture into a paste until it's become a deep orange and red colour. Add to this mixture 1 tablespoon and 2 extra teaspoons of fish sauce, along with the juice of 1½ whole lemons. Stir well until a thick dressing is formed. Now that we have everything ready, it's time to get mixing. Sprinkle in a generous amount of crushed roasted unsalted peanuts and combine all the prepared ingredients and stir well with the dressing. Use a chopstick to avoid bruising the ingredients as you mix. Once all combined, you can just pop it into the fridge and serve it later when chilled. Now these dishes that we've just made are served over the first 2 days of Tet. It's a humble feast that can fill the bellies of those who've been working hard all year. On the last day of Tet, it's our duty to usher off Ang Dao with one final feast. In our family, that means jiao ga, or chicken congee. Start off by soaking 1 cup of rice in 1 cup of lukewarm water for an hour. This helps the congee cook quicker and release the starch. Whilst the rice is rehydrating, let's work on our chicken. Buy a free-range chicken from your local poultry farm or butcher or supermarket. Before we boil this, we need to mould it into a presentable shape. We do this by cutting down the breast side of the chicken and butterflying it so that it sits flat on the chopping board. This will require a bit of bending back the bones and thighs until the joints dislocate and don't spring back. Next, push back the head along the spine and interlock the wings like this. From here, make incisions on the joint of the leg that connects to the feet to the drumstick. Realize you've made the incision on the wrong side of the bird and then start to panic a little. Mom, help, please. Take a step back and watch the master at work. What we're meant to do is make the incision on the inside of the joint and bend it backwards so that it folds into the bird like this. Remember, we're not cutting through the joint, but just enough to loosen it so that we can bend it. Next, grab some butcher twine and secure the 2 legs together by tying the twine underneath the drumstick and the feet together. Don't forget to keep the liver and the giblet for later on. Next, bring 2 liters of water to the boil and carefully place in your chicken with the wing facing upwards. Add in a quartered peeled brown onion and cover it with a lid. Turn down the heat to medium and boil until the thickest part of the chicken has reached an internal temperature of 66 degrees Celsius. If you don't have a thermometer, just cook it for about half an hour. Once cooked, remove the chicken and place it carefully on a plate. Using the leftover broth, we now will make our congee. Start by adding in the soaked rice, including the water that was rehydrating it. At this stage, we'll also flavour the congee with 1 tablespoon of fish sauce, 1 teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of MSG, and half a teaspoon of sugar. Cover with a lid and turn the heat to low to let the congee cook and thicken. Stir every 10 minutes to ensure the rice doesn't stick to the bottom of the pot. If you're happy with the thickness or viscosity, taste to see if re-seasoning is required, otherwise you can turn off the heat and keep the lid on to keep it warm. The final piece is to create the ginger dipping sauce. Take out the mortar and pestle again, add into it 4 slices of roughly chopped ginger, 3 cloves of peeled garlic, 3 red hot chilies, or 2 if you don't want it too much heat, half a teaspoon of MSG, and 1 tablespoon of sugar. Pound the mixture down into a paste and add in 1 tablespoon and 2 teaspoons of fish sauce to flavour. Finally, squeeze in 1.5 lemons and add just 2 teaspoons of water, while stirring to ensure that all the flavour and seasoning has been fully combined. Now it's time to plate up. This will go to the altar for prayer, after which we take a heavy hilted blade and carve the chicken. Serve this with some fresh Vietnamese mint or our rum from before, and that's really all there is to it. Best served with an accompanying family for good vibes. See you later, Unk Bao. I'll see you next year, mate. This concludes the Tastes of TET video. If you do try and make any of it, let us know how it tastes. For all the proper recipes, please visit our website. I want to take this time to also thank my mum, who's inspired me along my journey of learning how to cook. She's such an amazing woman who cooked for her family out of passion and love. Thank you everyone who decided to tune in. Have an awesome new year and stay classy.